Perfect. So now, yes, it's an immense pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Elizabeth Anderson, John Dewey Distinguished University Professor of Philosophy and Women's Studies at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where she has taught since 1987. She is the author of Value in Ethics and Economics, The Imperative of Integration, Private Government, Hijacked, How New Liberalism Turned the Work Ethic Against Workers, and also How Workers Can Take It Back, in numerous widely reprinted articles in journals of philosophy, law, and economics. This introduction was almost unnecessary, given that I think all of us know who Elizabeth Anderson is. We feel very, very honored to have her for our first Vision Speaker Series session of this academic year. And she will be giving a presentation entitled From Limitarianism to a Better World. Elizabeth Anderson, you have 45 minutes, but you can take a little bit longer if you need. And the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and the nudge to think about what a better world would look like. As you know, the United States is in the midst of a very severe crisis of democratic backsliding. It's not, most people in America do not support this, but we're really in a crisis. On the other hand, that's no reason not to dream of a better future. I'm always reminded of what happened in the UK during World War II, fighting fascism in Europe, really on the brink of survival. And at that time, William Beveridge, the architect of Britain's welfare state, published his proposal. There were lines around the block right in the middle of World War II, right? They're already dreaming of a better world, even in the midst of a crisis. And I think that's what we have to do now. So just quickly, we see very high degrees of wealth inequality in the United States. This blue line here, that's the bottom half of the population, essentially has zero wealth. Okay. This green line at top, it shows around now, about 75% of all the wealth is held by the top 10%. And within the top 10%, about almost 40% is owned just by the top 1%. So extreme levels of wealth inequality in the United States. And what I'm going to start off doing is give, in addition to the wonderful reasons for limiting the amount of wealth that any individual could hold, I'm just going to add to some of those reasons. But Ingrid, wrote the book on this subject. I'm building on her research based on the concrete experiences of what we're seeing in the United States, which has about 900 billionaires, thousands and thousands, many millions actually of multimillionaires. So what happens when wealth inequality gets this extreme? Well, just look to the United States, we'll see. An additional reason to limit wealth is that in practice, the very rich are legally unaccountable. We find this time and time again. They can break the law pretty much with impunity. Why? Well, even the United States Department of Justice, which has a huge budget, found itself absolutely unable to hold any of the fraudsters who precipitated the financial crisis of 2007 to 8 to account. Massive amounts of fraud were detected even before the crash. Nobody was held to account. Okay. Why? The DOJ tried to prosecute some of these very wealthy people who made fortunes and did not lose those fortunes when the markets crashed. They kept on to their wealth. Everybody else is wiped out. They tried prosecuting a couple of them. These people are wealthy. They have 200 lawyers that they can hire on their side, literally. Ran circles around the Department of Justice. They couldn't make charges stick. In addition, even during the Obama administration, they just found it completely impossible to hold the rich to account for the abuses, all kinds of illegality. And so they adopted a posture of deferred prosecution. They would write these agreements saying, if you just behave well from now on, we won't prosecute you. well, yes, they sign these agreements. Maybe they would pay a token fine far below the profits that they made from various illegal conduct. And then they would just go on behaving badly, breaking laws. And of course, this is really practically the foundation of the big tech companies. They call it disruption and they think it's a virtue, but what they really mean is breaking the law. Okay, all of the big tech companies have engaged in illegal monopolization and restraints of trade, breaking local regulations. Tesla broke public health regulations to keep their factories open during COVID. It just goes on and on. Okay, and nothing ever happens to these people, right? And that's what they believe, that they should be able to break the laws, the regulations, safety regulations, anti-discrimination law with impunity for the sake of economic growth, most of which, in fact, all of which they pocket personally. A second reason, it's not just that the rich capture regulatory agencies and capture the government through campaign finance, overwhelming lobbying, and so forth. It's not just through the state that they're exercising power. They also exercise power through what I call private government. I wrote a book about this. That is, they exercise dictatorial power through their control over the firms that they own. Here we're talking principally of the business owners and CEOs of major publicly held corporations. They rule the lives of workers, and workers not only have no autonomy at work, but often the reach of employers goes to outside work. So, for instance, censorship of employee speech is very common in the United States. We're seeing it happen now. People getting fired for saying things that to which other people object. But I also want to stress in the United States, the dominance of private equity. It's taking over industry after industry. Private equity is really very little more than a bag of schemes to transfer the revenues of the firm from workers and vendors and every counterparty into the pockets of the private equity managers. It's just a simple transfer of revenues and property and goods into the hands of the very rich. And there's many schemes that they use to do this. A lot of it involves monopolization, but private equity has torn through American retail, restaurant chains. They've destroyed local newspapers. They're very exploitative as landlords in mobile home parks, animal clinics. They're leaving pets to die. Nursing homes, they're leaving patients to die, literally. Hospitals, they've taken over autism services. And again, it's completely exploitative. Dental practices, it just goes on and on and on. One industry after another, taken over by private equity, resulting in worse service for customers, lower wages, and very stressful conditions for workers. Essentially, every counterparty, also elimination of side benefits to the communities where these businesses work, right? All just into the hands of the pockets of billionaires. It's massively destructive. But I think if we're going to look at how the deployment of economic power in the private sector most affects human beings, it's certainly through big tech. So here we have Bill Gates, who predicted that AI within 10 years will replace many doctors and teachers, and humans will not be needed for most things. AI will just put us all on the, right, get rid of all of our jobs. Now we'll just be looking at our screens the whole time. Without any, we'll be de-skilled. There's no reason to acquire these skills. AI will be better than us, purportedly. no scope for meaningful activity. So what's going to happen, right? It's the WALL-E world that they're projecting for us. Okay, but what this shows is if this is utopia for them, well, sure is, because they'd be making money from it, but it's not utopia. This is not most people's ideas of utopia. Okay, being idled and attached to their screens and consuming stuff, right? That's been sold to them online. Okay, and I think the very idea that these big tech billionaires think of themselves as the greatest benefactors of humanity simply for the technology they're creating is evidence that when people are enormously wealthy, they're deeply alienated from ordinary people and their lives and ordinary people's aspirations. They're blind to what ordinary people want if they fantasize that somehow they're great benefactors to humanity through their technology. And indeed, most tech people actually have a p-doom greater than 0. What that means is a prediction that all of humanity will die with the deployment of an AI system that is smarter than anybody. Okay, there's even a book written about this recently that just came out. I'm not so confident that a superhuman AI would kill us all just because it becomes autonomous and starts running on its own goals that are not aligned with human goals. I think before that fantasy would ever take place, the idea that some malignant human agents would use AI to destroy everything, that I think is much more probable. But they don't care, right? They're in a mad rush to create this technology. Fourthly, famously, billionaires support autocracy. Here we have the famous cartoon from a Washington Post cartoonist, which Jeff Bezos, there he is there, offering a bag of cash to President Trump. Okay, and he refused to print this, even though he claims to be a libertarian in favor of free speech. He owns the Washington Post, so he had the power to stop it from being published. But this is essentially what's happened. Billionaires support autocracy. Many of them believe in autocracy. Okay, that is now the reigning ideology in Silicon Valley. Okay, they would prefer that they were the autocrats rather than Donald Trump, but they're perfectly willing to bend the knee to him if he threatens their ability to make mergers and make money. And so the first people who sell out democracy are the very, very, very rich because they identify themselves with their immense wealth. And they won't do anything. They'll throw anybody and anything under the bus to maintain and build their wealth. And so if you look who's really resisting autocracy in America, it's ordinary people who are doing it. Okay, we have many, many grand juries who are refusing to indict people who've been put on arrest for purportedly resisting immigration agents or interfering with their activities. And grand juries time and again are refusing to indict these people, so they can't be put on trial or convicted. Okay, like that's where the action is happening with ordinary juries saying, we don't like the abuses of these ICE agents, these immigration agents who are kidnapping people. We don't want that. That's what's happening. Okay, so we have some very strong reasons to limit the total amount of wealth. I won't get into how, what the number should be. I haven't really thought that through. Ingrid, I think, has some pretty reasonable thoughts. But then the question arises, what means should we take to limit wealth? And here I just want to first make an argument that we should work on that in general, predistributive strategies are better than redistributive strategies when they can be implemented. Predistribution means you change the rules of the economic game to make sure that nobody even manages to accumulate this wealth in the first place. Redistribution means that, right, you take the wealth away from them, usually through taxation. And what I just want to argue that predistribution in general is better. Once people have this wealth, they feel enormously aggrieved that they, that it's taken away from them. They feel they have a right to it. Whereas if you just prevent them from accumulating in the first place, right? First of all, they then don't have the wealth to corrupt government and capture it and stop redistribution. But also there's just less resentment and less motivation to capture the government. Okay, so how would we do it? Focusing now on predistributive strategies. Well, job number one is to eliminate various business models that are predatory, that are negative value added, that actually reduce, the well-being of humanity, or that are anti-democratic in various ways. Okay, there's a lot of them. Monopolies, of course, since the 1980s, antitrust law has almost been suspended in the United States. We have enormous consolidation of corporations, especially in tech, but not only there. I think we really just have to implement a set of regulations to eliminate private equity, or at least all the redistributive strategies, the strategies that add no value, but simply pull money from the pockets of other people into the pockets of the owners of the private equity firms. Okay, you could just eliminate all those. And then private equity says, oh, but we do so much better management. Okay, well then make the money, honestly, and not just through a pure, redistributive strategy internally to the firm. Fossil fuels obviously have to be eliminated. In the United States, a lot of our utilities are for-profit. That's both for energy and for water. All of these are predatory monopolies. There's every reason to put them in public control and eliminate the profit motive. We're seeing this time and time again. The communities that actually have publicly owned utilities, that is community or state-owned utilities, have vastly lower utility bills. They're moving much more quickly into the green transition, and a lot less exploitation. Eliminate for-profit healthcare and most for-profit schools. Some of them are okay, but the proliferation of them has led to enormous amounts of scams. We see whenever you go to a for-profit healthcare system, you get higher prices and worse service. And then, importantly, eliminating various kinds of speculative and destabilizing finance. A lot of billionaires are made through various artificial assets, crypto, SPACs. There's all kinds of derivatives. Most of these don't add any kind of value at all. They just enrich the people who created these instruments, and they don't serve the real economy. None of these things, none of these asset classes, none of them serve the real economy. They're just rigged in such a way as to guarantee that the issuers of these assets make a lot of money. Whether the people who invest in them make any money is a very iffy proposition, usually not. The second thing, we do need to restore high marginal tax rates on all sources of income. And here, I just want to point out, Thomas Piketty points this out too. The United States was the great inventor of steeply progressive income taxes. So we see at the peak here in World War II, the United States, they had 94% marginal tax rate. Okay, you can't make billionaires with a 94% marginal tax rate. It got way down, but even under, when Reagan became president, the marginal tax rate was still almost 70%. Okay, and now the taxes are much lower. This is only taxes on earned income. If you look at taxes on capital income, they're much lower than that, closer to 20% in the United States. Piketty Dewey makes the point, I think it's very important, that high marginal tax rates, at some point, they're going to raise less revenue, but the point of them is not to raise revenue. It is to make people realize that there's no incentive in going through all the rigmarole to get an extra dollar, because almost all of it will get taxed away. So in fact, it functions essentially as a predistributive. When the tax rates get high enough, they actually have a predistributive function. It's not like anybody's making this huge money anymore, because it's not worth it to negotiate high salaries for a CEO, because virtually all that money would be going to the government. So that's why you do it. It's functionally to put a ceiling on how much people would get in the first place. We would also, of course, have to cap the amount of money that people can inherit. I would recommend a cap quite low. I don't know, maybe $1 million or something. And cap that, and then you can dissolve the highly concentrated fortunes in one generation. And then what should we do with that money? What should we do, right? A lot of money will not be accruing to the top 1% or 1/10 of 1%. So what should we do with that money? And there's a lot of wealth. Okay, and what I'm going to argue here, this is not a complete agenda for remaking the economy, but it's one aspect of this which I think is very important, and that is redirecting wealth, redirecting finance for the sake of geographical equity. In the United States, inequity, just by the place where you were born, the inequality is absolutely immense. There are whole large regions of the country where if you're born in poverty, you literally have zero chance of getting out. I mean, there might be a random person who gets out, but really these people are stuck, very prominent in minority communities and rural communities, this lack of opportunity. I was a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences Commission on reimagining the economy. And is a group of academics and community activists and like all kinds of people, all across America, business people. And we worked out some ideas for how to make the economy work for ordinary people. So we issued a report called Advancing a People First Economy, which you can find on the American Academy of Arts and Sciences website. And our idea was we have to make the economy work for ordinary people and not just for the rich and people everywhere. And one of the things we did, I was on a subcommittee of this commission where we went around and we had focus groups and recorded them, just finding out all kinds, people from all different classes, all different parts of the country, all different kinds of communities, and asked them what were their goals, their economic goals, what would they like to see. And remarkably, it really didn't matter, urban, rural, immigrant, native born, whatever. Everybody pretty much had the same goals. They wanted security for themselves and their families. That is an elimination of poverty and precarity. They wanted opportunities to build wealth. And then, somewhat surprisingly, given the stereotype of Americans as hyper-individualistic, a very strong theme of wanting to be able to contribute to one's community. If we saw this all over the country, it really didn't matter what region you were looking at, that theme just came through loud and clear. That once people were secure and had enough free time and just enough so that they didn't have to just work on where their next meal was coming from, their horizons, their planning horizons extended beyond themselves and their families. And they said they wanted to make their communities work better. They wanted to help their communities. Okay, there's an incredibly strong theme. And so that's one of the things the commission did then was, okay, we have to think about how to do that. Okay. And one of the things we identified was that in many, many communities across the country, there's no banks. Okay, they have a lack of financial services in rural areas and minority communities predominantly, but really even in fairly large neighborhoods and big cities, you can find this as well. No financial services, okay? And so what we proposed was a lot of investment should be made in nonprofit community banking. And these would be community banks that would know local needs, local community needs, be able to make loans and so forth. Because right now we have national banks that are located in New York City and a few other major cities like Chicago that are supposed to serve the whole country. But in fact, the local branches know nothing of the local economy and its needs. All of the money is getting channeled to creating derivatives and so forth in the major metros. And even if there's a bank branch of a national bank, it's not really serving the community. It's taking depositors' money and shifting it to the major metros, okay? But community banking would then be dedicated to financing projects of people in those local communities, rooted in local knowledge of what they need. So the idea is to have democratically directed and locally controlled finance for local projects that are both at the individual level and at the community level, funding various nonprofits. Okay, now the question is, how would this actually work? And here, I think everybody should read Fred Block's book. It just came out, The Habitation Society. Creating Sustainable Prosperity is a really brilliant book, and it has a brilliant idea, okay? What he points out is that what commercial banks are given is a grant of power from the national government to create money out of thin air, okay? And right, a depositor comes in and they put $1,000 into one of their banking accounts, and then the bank is legally permitted to loan $10,000 on the basis of that $1,000 deposit, okay? They just created $9,000 out of thin air. Well, why should that power to create money out of thin air only be given to the national commercial banks? That's the way it works in the United States, okay? Well, you know, the state in a way is franchising the power to create money out of thin air. And you could endow nonprofit community banks with that power and raise the reserve requirements on commercial banks in order to basically redistribute that power. A lot of his argument is based on the reality that for all this money creation, in fact, the for-profit sector is self-financing. That is, all of its investments actually they're not really, they don't need the banking system to raise money for investment. They, in fact, essentially 100% of all investment needed is just being generated by retained profits by the firms themselves, okay? And hence it would be quite low cost to radically reduce the money creation capacity of the big national banks and reallocate that money creation power to local community banks, okay? Because businesses can finance themselves from the retention of their own profits and investment that way. This ends up being a pre-distributive policy as well. And the reason for that is, many of you probably have looked at the exploding stock market, notwithstanding the fact that we have a shaky economy that's not working for a lot of people, most people, in fact. How could this be? Because right now in America, the upper middle class, they have private pension schemes. They're investing in their own accounts, right? And those funds are big. They're being used to buy stocks in the stock market. So the stock market keeps on going up, regardless of the underlying state of the economy. But it's not because you actually need higher stock values to fund investment. That's not where investment's coming from. Okay, well, if you stop that spigot because now the money's being invested locally, maybe in small businesses and small nonprofits. Okay, the stock market, right, it's not going to be going up. And you won't have these mountains of cash that can be used just to create fake assets and accumulate more wealth at the tippy top. Of course, in order to do that, you have to make up for the losses in the private pension schemes by better funding the public pensions, but that needs to happen in any event. And then what would that money be used for? Well, in part, it would be used, right, now that you have different money creation capacity, that could be devoted to green energy, public infrastructure for the energy and environment transition, for both mitigation and adaptation. But finally, and this is very important, I'm going to spend some time on this. What would local nonprofits be doing? I think a very good use would be a radical reform of social services, of how social services get operated. And that would be for communities and for workers and for democracy altogether. So let me just explain this vision. There's a brilliant book. It's really, I think, a transformative book written by Hillary Cottam called Radical Help. And Cottam is she is an organizational entrepreneur who just radically rethinks social services and how we could redesign them so that they're simultaneously fulfilling for the workers who are participating in social services, but actually succeed in helping people, and not just helping people keep their heads above water, but actually building capabilities. So it's a wonderful book. In this book, she describes a number of experiments that she did with local governments in the UK in reforming social services, some of them for the elderly, to help maintain their capacity to function in their homes. It's almost a universal desire of the elderly to stay at home and not have to go to some facility to get their care. Also, help for the poor, help for people who are in various kinds of trouble, such as addiction, mental health problems, and so forth. What Cottam is doing is re-envisioning what social services could look like, services to people who are in various kinds of distress, addiction, all kinds of things, chronic unemployment, inability to kind of get launched for youth, so forth. And in these experiments, she reports we have to get out of this sort of bureaucratic mindset. Suppose, for instance, children are not flourishing in a certain family. Right now in the United States, it's treated as more of a policing kind of thing, policing of the poor. The children would be taken away from their parents, right, and put in a foster system. The grounding premise of Child Protective Services in the United States is that you have to, in order to give resources to a neglected child, you have to take them away from the only people who love them, right? And so love and material support are completely separated, and you get one or the other, but not both. Well, Cottam has a way of re-envisioning how we should be thinking about this. Most child neglect is not deliberate. It's due to the poverty and precarity of the parents, and often the dangers of the neighborhood in which they live. Well, instead of policing the poor, you could reconfigure Child Protective Services to see, okay, we have, they're funded, there's money there. You could get more money from community banks. How can we build the capabilities of the parents so that they can effectively take care of their children? And the picture here, Cottam is explicitly building on the capabilities approach to re-envision what social services could be like. In contrast, what the welfare system is like in the United States and the UK is just keeping people's heads above water, right? give them a certain amount of money, right? Barely enough to survive, and then you think you're done. But Cottom's view is no, a lot of what's happening is you have to build capabilities. And the way she envisions this is to create multi-specialty teams of, some people would be from the nonprofit world, say in community mental health. Others would actually be civil servants in local government, and put together teams of people, social workers, peer counselors from community mental health. Sometimes police officers might be needed. Multi-specialty teams would then go to families and consult with them about what their goals are, what skills they would need to be able to, get their lives in order. And then these teams would be unleashed, able to use their judgment and autonomy both to build relationships with the recipients of services, engage the agency of service recipients in re-envisioning what a real life would look like, what a better life, a life where they actually had agency and ability to direct their lives would look like, and build like a plan for each family, right? And what she's shown is that if you actually do this, the upfront costs can be high, but the long run costs are actually quite low, because people then are able to get steady employment. The children, graduate from school. They're not engaged in petty crime, right? That the long run payoffs can be very high because you're building capabilities. And finally, I just want to stress that on this model, it's also the case that the service workers are emancipated, right? Because right now, a lot of civil servants in social services in the United States, they're weighed down by bureaucracy, by paperwork, by millions of regulations. And so they had paperwork, they had to check off every box that they did this and that. There's no effort to see whether what they're doing and required to do is actually working. Right. And so many of these civil servants are deeply demoralized because the system sets them up to fail. They follow all the rules, but people's lives are not improved. What they really want is they want to be free to actually improve people's lives. So what we have here is also a re-envisioning of what human services work could be, so that it's actually engages the initiative and judgment and skills and autonomy of the workers. It's more fulfilling work, and they actually get to achieve what they want, which is really helping people and not just following a whole set of rules, which once they follow them may or may not help people, but very often leaves people no better off than before. So what I'm suggesting here is also that when we implement a program that is focused on empowering communities and enriching democracy, people getting together in localities to decide, well, we need something for this community, and then they can tap into the resources of a community bank to get those things done. That's a way of rebuilding democracy. And it's a long-standing theme of democratic theorists that people need the experience of democracy, of participating in democratic decision-making and seeing its success, not just at the national level, but in their lives directly, and empowering communities to redesign social services and figure out what they need and direct finances to what they need is a democracy building enterprise, which will then build capabilities, for democratic participation, and also rebuild trust in democracy itself. So just to return to where I began, We also have to think of this in the context of democratic backsliding. It's very severe in the United States, but a lot of it is because large swaths of the population have lost faith in democracy, and they're looking to some leader to rescue them. It's a fantasy. It's totally false, but the system isn't working for them. And that's right. You go back to that first slide I had. Okay, the bottom 50% have zero wealth, right? And that means that they're constrained in their vision for the future. Because when all you can do is just look forward to the next day, week, or month, you don't have a planning horizon that can go out to the future. And then you think, well, I just have to rely on some big guy, right, to rescue me, because they don't see democracy working for them. But it's critical then to bring democracy to the local level, not just hand it to the richest people in town, telling everybody what they have to be doing, as is true for many localities in the United States. And rebuilding trust in democracy is really critical, giving people confidence that they can work together to improve their lives rather than having to rely on some strong man who makes promises to them that will never be fulfilled. Okay, I'll leave you there, open for Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Anderson. I'm just going to stop the recording. Thank you. So that we can